Hey guys, June here, and in a previous video we've talked about some of the paradigms behind ability selection so that we can minimize the number of times we need to use some of the weaker abilities, maximize the number of times that we get to use the more powerful ones, and overall improvise ability rotations that have a high average damage. That strategy revolved around a framework that we constructed from some of the shorter cooldown abilities in those respective styles, which you see on screen now, and if you haven't watched that video I would strongly recommend clicking the card on screen now to watch that before you watch this one. The framework we're going to build for this video is very similar to that, but we're going to exploit the fact that there are no shared cooldowns between these short cooldown abilities, and so by swapping weapons back and forth frequently, we can eliminate the need to use weak basics at all. To see what I mean, let's start by taking a look at a relatively average rotation based on the principles from that previous video. Here we'll assume that we're using dual wield ranged, so we're going to be cycling our abilities in that triplet fashion we talked about in the previous video, with Needle Strike acting as the framework for that rotation. This allows us to go a decent length of time without having to use any weak abilities, but if we're going to cycle only basics, let's say we assume that we're starting from 0% adrenaline and we're trying to build to death swiftness as quickly as possible, it's not long before we have to start defaulting to some of our 100% ability damage basics. Instead, we can build a pretty similar ability rotation. It's still going to be subdivided into groups of 3, and our framework abilities are still going to be there, but instead of only functioning off the framework of the Needle Strike, we're also going to add in Dazing Shot and the corresponding weapon switch so that we're able to utilize both. By doing this, we've completely eliminated those low damage abilities from our rotation, and although it is a really high effort method to be doing this, every weapon switch that you do effectively changes a 100% damage ability up to a 157% damage ability. This is a big bonus, and if you're willing to put in the effort, it's definitely worthwhile doing, especially because once you've built up to 100% adrenaline and you use death swiftness and start rotating thresholds into your ability rotation as well, there will be fewer spaces where low damage basic abilities would be, and thus you'll have to actually do very few weapon switches overall in order to maintain this good ability rotation. If we wanted to adapt this strategy for magic, it would simply be a copy-paste scenario where instead of Dazing Shot and Needle Strike, we would be swapping back and forth and utilizing both Sonic Wave and Concentrated Blast. If instead we want to adapt this strategy for melee, we're actually going to step away from the triplet rotation framed around the Fury ability that we talked about in the previous video. Instead, I like to visualize this ability rotation in groups of 4, where the first two abilities in any grouping of 4 are going to be the abilities Cleave and Decimate, which are respectively for two-handed and dual-wield melee, and deal up to 188% weapon damage. Each of these abilities is usable every 4th ability, which means as a bare minimum, even just rotating basics, you're going to be doing 188% weapon damage abilities at least half the time. This leaves only 2 empty slots in our 4 ability framework, and we can plug those holes with things like Fury, Sever, and Dismember to never even think about our low damage basic abilities. Overall, this results in even more of a net gain to your DPS than with ranged or magic, and just like those, as you start to incorporate thresholds, you'll have to do the weapon switch less frequently as you're relying less on basic abilities. As it's probably clear by now, this is a sweaty, high-effort method of trying to do good DPS, but if you're willing to give this a shot, you'll find that the output is certainly worth the effort, and if you're going to try and start establishing habits with this, it's a great idea to put some of your weapon switches on keybinds. Doing all of the appropriate weapon switches and abilities will feel very chaotic at first, and you may even notice a slight DPS loss if you're making mistakes such as trying to spam out the Cleave ability while you still have dual wield equipped. Like anything else, getting comfortable with this is just simply a matter of repetition and practice, and your DPS will thank you for it. Because of just how sweaty this method is, I pretty much exclusively use it for melee since that's where the most significant net benefit to your DPS is, and I tend to be pretty selective about where I use it since it's so much effort it really does take the piss out of casual bossing. With that said though, hopefully this video gives you all the information you need to construct these kinds of rotations on your own and maybe squeeze out some crazy fast Rax kills. As always, comment section and PM are both open for questions. Thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.